netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman.
Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 5th, 2020. A little bit of a throwback intro today. We'll get around to explaining that at some point this week. Good morning, everybody. Time for yet another show. Even for the President of the United States, it's time for a show for you, too. I don't know if you're going to turn off the TV for a little bit. Maybe turn on the radio. It's probably not going to be your favorite show, but, you know, it's a good time to experience a wide variety that the world has to offer. Let's just say. Now might be the time. Anyway, Kagro in the Morning is live now. It's true. We're here. Bill knows it. He tells us this all the way from Portland, Maine. And we always like to turn to him in the morning to figure out what the hell we're going to do and then ignore it. But, you know, it's always worth a shot. There might be a plan in here somewhere. Let's take a look. Kagro in the Morning is live now. Yes, it's true. Kagro X. Me, David Waldman, and Dr. Greg Dworkin. This is true. He is a doctor. What great timing. Isn't it? He'll be here to do a little Monday morning primal screaming. Oh, that's a good idea. I should probably add some screaming. It'll probably clear out the throat a little bit. A little hot tea, a little screaming just to get things started in the morning. Over President Super Spreader's super spreader related activities with jokes. So we'll try and buy a couple of those before this whole thing ends and see if we can't, well, you know, as usual, the task, keep you sane during this crazy time. And it is pretty crazy, and I turned down the gain just a little bit to help keep it a little less crazy for you in the morning. All right. Well, you know, lots of things happened during this weekend, and one of them is that the president got the COVID. We discussed it on Friday. We knew about it. He knew about it last Friday before last, probably. It seems to me like everything that happened over the weekend, and we'll try and catch up and I guess do some sort of timeline clarification at some point. Although, if you're like me, you probably read somewhat obsessively over the weekend about what was going on. I think I sort of broke my personal doom scrolling record of just flipping through the Twitter feed. And now, I mean, for a long time, I think a lot of us have said seriously and joked, depending, you know, on your mood and how you wake up in the morning, that, you know, you wake up and you check the news feed, and sometimes you just have this weird feeling that I'm just checking to see if everything, you know, is the president alive? And now, of course, it's a serious question, and it changes the tenor of things. So we'll be checking in with Greg and talking about how they have obfuscated the record all the way through all of this. It's becoming clear that they haven't been, you'll never believe this, they haven't been truthful in laying out the facts or laying out the timeline. I know it's shocking, but every indication is that they had some idea, if not a solid one, that the president was COVID positive earlier than they let on. There are already articles in publication in the major newspapers of the nation outlining how they'd been tipped off by insiders, and there's a whole story behind who the insiders are and how that's coming to pass, how we're coming to hear from them. That's could take another 2 hours, but that the president was very explicit in his desire to hide the diagnosis as long as possible. I don't know how long he thought he would be able to do it. You know, Melania has made it in and out of Walter Reed Hospital under, let's say, somewhat less than immediately believable pretenses before. But again, you know, ordinarily we wouldn't be questioning such things except that they lie about absolutely everything. And standing on the cusp as we are of the possibility, the actual live possibility that Trump might be released from the hospital today, having been hospitalized, Saturday? Friday night? I can't even remember when he actually went in. But if he's out so quickly, already people are out there declaring their intention, to believe, to let everybody know that they believe, that the whole thing ended up being a hoax. I mean, COVID is a hoax after all. as it turns out, or at least President Trump's is. But, okay. So Greg tells me he was admitted Friday afternoon. That was when we had the big helicopter airlift that looked like, I even enjoyed that I made the joke that it looked like the Saigon evacuation. And then I got the fun experience of seeing the same joke made on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live. It wasn't a hard one. Helicopter, person leaving, emergency involving the President of the United States. So it was an easy one to make. But we have the possibility that he may be released from the hospital today. That might turn out just to be his own wishful thinking. It might turn out to be, we have this weird relationship going on here. One of the problems with treating the President of the United States and a crazy President of the United States at that, especially in a military hospital, is the lines may blur at some point between medical advice and medical consent and orders from the commander-in-chief to the commanding officers of this military medical facility. And of course, I think we've already seen that, by which I refer to yesterday's joyride through the streets of, is it in DC? I don't even know where Walter Reed actually lies with respect to the DC line, but a ride through the streets to wave at supporters who have been out there waving back at him, waving flags. It's in Bethesda. Okay. I'm confused by that in the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Every branch wants to be in Bethesda, apparently. But, riding through the streets and waving at people, which by itself, waving from inside of a car isn't particularly dangerous, except, of course, in order to do that, you have to put a COVID patient in a car and if the patient is the president, well, somebody's got to drive somebody around. You shouldn't be driving when you're sick with COVID and I guess on a bunch of drugs. We'll have Greg tell us about those. But he's got to have Secret Service with him. And they went in, whatever PPE they could muster. But you're really talking about sitting there in by the way, they pointed out, literally hermetically sealed limousine because it's sealed against chemical attack as well as bulletproof glass. And you're just stuck in there. It's the worst possible place to be if you're looking to not get COVID from the President of the United States. Definitely the worst thing you could do is lock yourself in a limo with him. But that's what they did. And that can't be in compliance with standard medical advice. I have a feeling that some commander-in-chief rank was pulled there. And I order you to get out of my way so I can go ride around in a limousine. I'm sure that story will be spelled out. The TikTok will be available for us, as they say, even they said in the business, even before there was a TikTok app. It'll all be available soon. Speaking of available soon, and available right now, Greg Dworkin, patiently waiting, and thank you for correcting us and getting us the location of Walter Reed. Are you in Bethesda right now, or reporting on the ground, or no?
I am not. I wouldn't be anywhere near that bunch of clowns, infectious and otherwise. So, you have to step back and look at the bigger picture. Monday mornings when we do this show is often almost impossible because things have just become so chaotic and so many things happen, even though I did a special appearance on Friday.
Yes, that's right. I forgot almost.
So many things have happened since then. That it's almost impossible to put them together in a coherent manner. I'll try to give you first the medical sketch. Maybe that'll take us to the half-hour break, and then afterwards we'll do the politics of it. But you really need less of a doctor. You need more Marcy Wheeler, who could put together a meticulous timeline in terms of what happened here and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So let me do some quoting from some of the docs I follow online. To try to give you a bigger idea. And it all starts with the idea that you cannot trust a single thing that they say. It's very important because we don't know when Trump got infected. We know a week ago Saturday there was the Rose Garden reception for Amy Coney Barrett, whose judgment, by the way, is awful given the fact that she agreed to this and then agreed to do an inside reception for 45 minutes where nobody was wearing masks. It doesn't matter that she herself has had COVID and
They
then
all have it now.
therefore is probably immune. What she did,
We'll
she had
see.
it over the summer.
Yeah.
What she did, and we didn't know that until this.
Right.
What she did is expose everybody else. So, but luckily, in her line of work, judgment isn't really an issue, right? Because
At this point,
you don't have to
it's
worry
not
about
as
that
much
sort
of an
thing.
issue. That's true. By the way, I've been handed a note, and that's important in the news business.
Yes.
Bethesda Naval Hospital, I guess, is part of the larger Walter Reed Medical Facility. They're the same thing and in the same place. They're both commonly known as one another. Is that the way it is? All right.
Yeah, it's a big complex, but it's in Bethesda.
Right. It's a big building
Everything's
with
in Bethesda.
patients.
If you're wondering about what it is, we can do details. But if you're wondering about where it is, it's Bethesda.
The where is now answered. Bethesda.
That's helpful information. Thank you for your research, staff.
Yes. Thank you, research staff. Can I get some breakfast in here? Yeah. Okay.
Give him a raise. Give him a raise.
Okay.
So,
done.
So you go back to that. That's when we know that there was exposure to a number of people, like Christie himself in the hospital right now.
Yes. Congratulations, Chris.
A lot of the senators, like Tom Tillis and
as well. Yes.
Mike Lee,
Right.
who were on the Judiciary Committee, and they're positive.
Yes.
Ron Johnson, who got it, was not at that particular setting. But it turns out that the senators, the Republican senators, but not the Democratic senators, the Republican senators have an in-person, no-mask lunch together every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So there may be two super spreader events.
Excellent.
One for Amy Coney Barrett supporters and the other for Republican senators in general, which is why Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham are going to have trouble getting this nomination through on time. Another story. We'll leave that for after the break. But we still go back to that Saturday. Trump was there. Melania was there. Tillis was there.
Yep.
Christie was there.
Yep.
The president of Notre Dame was there.
Yes.
All of these guys are
We're going to
positive.
talk about him. Bill Barr was there, not yet announced as positive. Originally
But
said
he is
he
wearing
would,
a mask, and he did agree to self quarantine this morning
After
for
a
reasons
while,
that are unclear. And so there's going to be more people that we know about. We know that Trump's body person was positive. There's other staff we don't know yet that they haven't talked about, but it's clearly a large cluster and a super spreader event that goes back to Saturday. But then you have to then look and see what happened over the subsequent week.
Yes.
We had a debate.
Right.
We had a Bedminster fundraiser.
Right. True.
Right.
Got that.
And then Thursday goes to saying that suddenly Trump found out that he was positive, and then by Friday afternoon he was sick enough so that he got transferred to Walter Reed. So one of my medical friends, Ed, MD, who's an ICU guy, Ed, not Dredd, I love his name, might be that Trump hates getting tested, so they haven't been testing him frequently and instead test the people around him. Hence, they're not saying when he was last negative because maybe they don't know. And the trouble is that the test that they're using, the Abbott test in the White House, is sparsely sticking to protocol. It only has a 50-60% rate of picking up tests, so it could be wrong. And therefore, Trump could have been exposed. And if, in fact, he himself is not being tested, we don't really know when he got infected.
Yeah,
now, that's important.
Right.
Because, was he infected at the debate? Did he infect Bedminster? Did he know? Did he deliberately do these things? Yes. And that gets into the politics of it, as we'll talk about, because one of the two Politico articles that I'll go over in the second half hour about how bad things are going for Republicans notes that, look, if anybody finds out that he knew and he actively exposed people knowing that what he was trying to do is, fake it and pretend that maybe he didn't have it, that's it. It's over.
Okay,
Even his own base would desert him for that.
All right, base, get ready.
Right? And so we don't know, and that's really important because, again, it lends itself to the political issue, which is also a medical issue of when was he infected, and when did he know it, and how many people. I mean, it's a variation of the old Howard Baker, What did he know and when did he know it? But in this particular case, it's crucial because it goes back to contact tracing and how many people we have to worry about.
Science. Yeah, you need that. He, of course, doesn't believe in the science. Okay, yeah, it's important to know, and it's important because you want to warn other people. He doesn't want to warn people who don't support him, of course. One of the many millions of stories we could explore is no phone call or contact whatsoever to anybody at the Biden campaign to tell him, we might have infected you with the
But it goes back to the Amy Coney Barrett super spreader event, which is now how it's known, and that's how she is known.
Sounds like
okay, and so it all goes back to that.
Sale.
And then the events take place, and what he knew and when he knew it and who he infected. The people in Bedminster are not happy. They paid $250,000 for a lousy buffet, and they may die.
Well, you know, that was always
so
a risk with
not
the buffet.
Great. When is he going to have his next fundraiser? Because that's what he wants to do. So with all of that, then events happen,
right.
And as we start to pierce things together, we're only getting information from his doctor, Sean Conley, who's a liar. So the spin doctors who are taking care of him are letting us know that, in fact, after pushing and prodding and after the stories fall apart, he started to feel not good. And then people thought maybe he didn't look good during the debate on Tuesday. But by Thursday, he was on Sean Hannity. He already knew he was positive, even by the White House telling. That was not in-person interview. Mm-hmm. And intimated that, it's bad that Hope Hicks is positive and, it's bad and stuff like that. And then after, apparently he had done a rapid test, which was positive, and then got the PCR formal test later on after he got off Hannity. And then at 1 a.m. said, okay, I'm positive. And then over the course of Friday, his oxygen levels started to drop. He started to get short of breath. The White House got worried. They put oxygen on him but lied about it.
Yeah. And
then arranged for the helicopter Friday afternoon to take him over to Walter Reed. And when an update was given by this same doctor, Sean Conley, and staff, he lied about all of that. And then on Sunday, when he was caught lying, he said, I just lied about it because I wanted to be upbeat because that was what we're trying to do.
Right. I thought that was a fun excuse. Well, the reason I lied was I didn't want you to know the truth.
Yeah, pretty much. So what he's telling you is that you therefore cannot believe anything he said. So let's go into detail.
All right.
Two separate ways. I have two separate doctor threads here. One by Celine Gounder, who is an MD and an infectious disease expert, public health expert at NYU in Bellevue. And she says, look, what did we learn about the president's health?
I don't know.
And this was yesterday after the Spin Doctor conference.
Okay.
What did we learn? He had a fever. He had oxygen saturation level under 94% on Friday, which prompted his transfer to Walter Reed Hospital. His oxygen saturation dropped Saturday, and then he was started on dexamethasone, a pretty strong steroid. Now, not everybody reacts to dexamethasone the same way, but some people do get a little psychotic. In Trump's case, how do you know?
Is that
that was my point this morning. Yeah. Don't just assume that it's the dexamethasone that makes him tweet 97 times. You can get manic, you can get depressed, but you can also, Trump had a head start. So,
right.
You don't know.
Could be a normal day for him.
In any case, the president's kidney and liver function was normal. His cardiac function is normal or improving. What does that mean? Improving. Does that imply that there was something wrong before? Was it ever abnormal? We know he had an ultrasound. Was it an ultrasound of the heart, known as an echocardiogram? Probably, but they didn't tell us. He received something called Regeneron, which is a monoclonal antibody cocktail, on Thursday. And he was started on remdesivir, which is an antiviral, on Friday, and then dexamethasone, which is a steroid, on Saturday. So having an oxygen saturation of less than 94 means it's a severe infection. And remdesivir and dexamethasone are only recommended for patients with severe infection.
Okay.
So they're lying to you.
Yes, by telling us.
Some take it to be a good prognostic sign that the president walked to Marine One. That's meaningless. COVID patients can have very low oxygen levels and not feel short of breath, a phenomenon known as silent hypoxia or happy hypoxia. And that was one of the things that was noted from the beginning. Part of the problem with the hypoxia is you get small blood clots in your lungs, and your carbon dioxide level's okay, so you don't feel short of breath, but you're still sick. And then yesterday, Dr. Conley, meaning Saturday, reported that POTUS had been sick for 72 hours and then corrected himself and said the president was on his third day of illness. Again, trying to adhere to the White House line that Trump only found out on Thursday. But if my friend Ed's very astute observation is true, they may not even know when he turned positive.
Yeah, well,
and that's why they're being so coy about it, because they told us he was being tested every day, and that was probably a lie.
Huh. Boy, he's really asking for it.
But in that context, it makes sense that they don't know, and they didn't tell you. Well, when was this last negative? Well, we don't know because he never gets tested.
Yeah.
He just makes the little people get tested.
Right, and doesn't wear a mask because he says, I get tested all the time.
And I'm 6 feet apart from the little people.
Yeah.
Okay, so the incubation period, the time from exposure and infection with this COVID to symptoms, is average 4 to 5 days, but it could be as long as 14. Usually 12 is the number that we use. Well, that's important, by the way, because Biden is exposed on Tuesday, and then 5 days later on Sunday has a negative test. So the average is 4 to 5 days. Biden feels well, has a good schedule today, and he was negative yesterday. He's not going to be tested every day, but Biden at least promised to tell us about the result of every test. So it doesn't look like that Trump, who at the debate, you will recall from our discussions on the show, was trying to break Biden by making him stutter. It turns out, what if he knew and he was trying to kill Biden? but hey, it would be irresponsible not to speculate about this.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, so he broke
I
himself.
can't beat you, so I'll kill you.
That's not inconsistent with the drift into fascism.
Tuesday, Biden's exposed, but not a big exposure. He was pretty far apart. And the Biden people did their protocol. They came in with masks. They stayed away, so on and so forth. They didn't put up the plexiglass shield that Jamie Harrison did when he debated Lindsey Graham yesterday. But, at least, he was not that exposed, and he's got a negative, so Biden should be fine. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Anyway, Biden, Celine Gonder goes on to say, POTUS was most likely infected on September 25th to 26th, which coincided with indoor and outdoor events to announce the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And remember, even though everybody was sitting next to each other outside, they had an indoor reception, at least one, maybe two, because there were photographs in 2 different rooms. So those indoor, non-mask, huggy, kissy, everybody's celebrating, dancing on RBG grave kind of celebrations. Yes. In fact, karma. Yeah. So those events appear to have been super spreaders, with many in attendance since testing positive for COVID. So it goes back to that Saturday. But it remains possible that the president may have been infected elsewhere. I was startled to hear that the White House's daily COVID testing may not have been daily and didn't extend to all staff. Former Trump White House official drove Rogan on White House working conditions. The White House complex is the most cramped, unsanitary place of business I've ever worked. It's a miracle it took this long to hit it with COVID. I've been healthier since I left than I ever was when I worked there.
Yes. Probably had a lot of respiratory infections from working there.
Now, the doctor goes on to say patients infected with COVID may become infectious to others up to 3 days prior to symptom onset. So that means on Tuesday he may well have been infectious. That was the debate night. If POTUS developed symptoms on Wednesday and Thursday, he could have been infectious as early as Sunday, the week before, and was almost certainly infectious at the debate. So that's why Biden's getting tested. That's why we were worried about him, but he'll be okay. It's notable that the president and his entourage flouted the honor system and failed to be tested in the hours leading up to the debate. Remember now, what happened is that Chris Wallace got tested. Yeah. Biden got tested.
Yeah, it was in the rules.
But Trump didn't get tested because he got there, quote, late, unquote. Was that deliberate?
Yes.
Because was he already positive?
Yes. I don't know.
So, again, because you can't believe anything they say, you have to wonder whether he was already infectious, knew it, and then exposed people, which would be the end of his career. That's why they're not telling you what happened.
Yes. Well, we would hope it would be. I mean, it's kind of crazy out there.
Even his own people are saying it would be.
Okay.
The thing is, we don't know for sure because it's also possible that just, they're lying about testing.
Yeah.
So since they don't test anybody, they don't really know.
Yeah.
Rather than he knew and he did it anyway, it's, I don't know. I just, I said there's going to be 1 million tests ready by tomorrow, and just because I wrote it on a blank piece of paper and signed it,
doesn't
mean that anything actually happened.
It's pretty incredible, and the lying about the testing is spectacular. The
They
testing
lie
on its
about
own.
everything. You cannot believe a thing that they've said. So that's why we're trying to put this timeline together. So many questions remain.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to put together a rigorous timeline. I leave that for Marcy and brilliant people like that who can do it. I get bored.
All right.
Right? I'm not that S.
9:26. Greg left it for Marcy.
Okay. But
Check.
many questions remain. When did POTUS first test positive for COVID? When did he develop symptoms? Who did he expose? Was POTUS given Regeneron monoclonal antibody cocktail in hopes that he wouldn't become symptomatic? Is the president's diagnosis, were they trying to conceal it? How sick is he really? Those are the questions that, we had after hearing his doctors put together the story. So Bob Wachter, who is another different doctor, chair of the UCSF Department of Medicine, says, okay, and a very smart guy, says, look, Sean Conley's mea culpa. I was trying to reflect the upbeat attitude of the team, didn't want to give any information that would steer the course of his illness, and that's Trump's fingerprints. But even so, the Sunday was only slightly better than the Saturday briefing. The biggest news is that Trump had 2 episodes of hypoxia down to 93 to 94%, the oxygen saturation, and Conley evaded whether the saturation was ever below 90. It was never in the low 80s. That's not what we asked. It was at 89.
Hey.
That's low, by the way.
Oh.
Once you get below 90, you're really sick. 95 and above is normal. You can be 95 and you're okay. 95, you're okay.
Okay.
If you're 93, something's going on. And if you're below 90, you got to think about being in the hospital. We'll continue this after the break.
All right. Hey, I got to find the Bob Wachter thread. It looks like
I gave you 2 tweets, one right after the other.
The link didn't pop it up. So over the break, it looks like he started over again elsewhere. So we'll find it. It'll be okay. All right. We have plenty of oxygen. We know that much. And there's enough to last us this 2 minutes of the break. So we'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still with Greg Dworkin, still with talking about the president having COVID and lying about it, both when he got it and
so we're looking at it in terms of what the doctors think. But again, let me step back a little bit and say, having summarized up till now, please understand he's not dying, right?
Oh.
Forget about that. Also, yes, he has it. I've seen it at both ends. No, he doesn't really have it. It's all a scam. He's going to pop up and say, look, I'm cured by hydroxychloroquine. No. He's sick,
he's left
and
the
he has it, but he's
now.
not dying, and he appears to be recovering. It's just you got to be careful because you could look good for 3 or 4 days, get better, especially when you're on steroids, and then crash and burn.
I hear a lot of stories like that. A lot of people telling the stories of the COVID that struck their family, progressing in a similar fashion.
So sending them home today is really stupid, but that doesn't mean they won't do it, because one of the things you have to remember about these people, all of them, everybody associated with Trump, is that they're really stupid. Because if they weren't really stupid, they wouldn't be associated with Trump. Right?
Yeah.
So they may do stupid things. Don't be surprised. So Bob Wachter, UCSF medicine chair, says, look, regarding the chest CT that his spin doctor mentioned, there were some expected findings, but nothing of concern. What the hell does that mean? To be clear, the expected findings on a chest CT is it's normal.
Okay.
If it's not normal, then it's not an expected finding.
Yeah.
So because of that, the bottom line is every doctor who heard that said, okay, he's got viral pneumonia. And they're just not telling us. But it seems and that's why he was hypoxic. But it seems far likelier they found evidence of pneumonia or other manifestations of COVID lung involvement or inflammation. Remember, you can also get small blood clots, which is serious and raises the level of concern and risk. They pulled trigger and started dexamethasone, and that's something you only do when you're sick. So they were clearly concerned. Given
Very
documented
sick.
low oxygen levels, dexamethasone definitely was indicated. And then they said they're starting to plan for possible discharge as early as tomorrow. This was a yesterday comment. And even as White House has medical capacity, that seems like an awful call. And if they could give his last dose of IV remdesivir in the White House, that'd be okay, but a little risky. The mortality rate and treatment group with the remdesivir, the antiviral, for patients requiring oxygen was 23%.
That's
That's nearly 1 in 4 at risk of death. So you don't just say, okay, I feel good, I'm going home. And finally, most tellingly,
What if you do?
when Trump was hypoxic, they tried to put him on oxygen, and he was adamant he didn't need it. In my 35 years of practice, I've never seen a patient refuse oxygen. Well, he's not a pediatric pulmonologist. My patients refuse it all the time.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and it
stuff
illustrates
goes up your
who's running
nose.
the show, which may well be the scariest thing I heard. I'm telling you, you really need pediatricians taking care of this guy.
Yeah, basically. It seems like it.
Bottom line, it seems like
Closer
Trump
to
is
a
stable
pediatric
but remains at high risk given transient hypoxemia, some findings on chest imaging. The happy talk innovations are clearly at Trump's direction, putting his docs in a terrible position. No way he's ready for discharge tomorrow, and he'll probably go home, I'm adding, because he's stupid, the people around him are stupid,
doctor.
and the folks who work for him are intimidated. And so that's not a good situation, but that's the medical side of it.
Well, good point. Reminder for everybody that they do have some significant medical treatment capacity at the White House because, presidents live there and they want to be able to have that. And so I guess that's something that he could rely on. Speaking of the IV, what were they getting? Remdesivir IV. All the internet sleuths pointing out, seems to be a correct observation. The pictures released by the White House of Trump having his full day of work, maybe. Lots of sleuthing about that as well. But one of the things they pointed out, no indication of any bandaging on either hand. They said, what
Well, it doesn't
happened
have to be
with-
in your hand.
that's
an
true,
IV
although
could be inserted into the crook of your elbow. That's a very common place to put it. And it would
I
be
have
under your
seen such a
shirt, or it would be under your jacket. And what they do is they put a small plastic cannula, and then attached to that is the plastic line that leads to the IV. So you can disrupt that. You can take that off and, have the little cannula in your arm with nothing running on it, and then wear a shirt over it, and nobody would see it.
Well, that
That's
would be a handy
extremely
way
common.
of doing that. The nurses on the sleuthing thread were saying, well, our preferred practice, and that's all it is, I guess, was to start it, as far down the arm as possible because you can't put an IV in below that point again, and whatever it is. Not my.
Yeah,
area
there's lots of reasons, but I'm just saying.
I'm
if
just
you want to
wondering if
conceal
that's
it,
one
you
of
put
those.
it in
Yes,
in the crook of your elbow.
that's one of those things. That he
And
said. Tell you what,
that's easy.
Instead of doing it your way, doc and nurse, I order you, do it up here.
Speaking of nurses, I have to tell you, as a clinician, and I promise you, every single clinician who was listening to this spin doctor said to themselves, the guy's lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know when the guy was on oxygen. He doesn't know when his patient got this or that. Get me the nurse.
Okay. Yeah.
I want to know the truth. What's going on at the bedside here? You don't know. If you're my intern, you know no crap. I don't want to hear from you. Shut up. Get me the nurse. Let's find out what's really going on. That was my
That'll answer the
reaction when I was
question.
listening to him.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing was quite a show. Just putting him out there and then lining up the other docs behind him that I guess they had no role. I didn't see any of them speak, but they were just there to look like doctors. And they did. They did look like doctors. And he didn't. I noticed. I was struck by his never before been worn lab coat.
Well, we all have them.
We
don't wear them, but we put them on when we have to go on TV. I got one of those.
He's got a very special.
It's got your
one.
name on it. It's got your name stitched on it, so you know who you are.
He's got a presidential
and
seal
hopefully,
on
since you got it 35 years ago, it still fits you. But you don't have them.
His was neatly pressed and never been touched. The other docs had it looked like they had given theirs a couple more runs through the laundry. Let's say.
Right. So let's just go back to how all of this is playing. All right, and maybe let's start with Axios.
All right. Who's that?
A West Wing meltdown, they call it. Jonathan Swan, who was really ticked off that he got lied to. And as soon as the doctor opened his mouth, he basically said, you don't have to believe anything this guy said. He lied to us.
Oh, okay.
And he tweeted that. He tweeted that several times. In fact, I think I have it in the pundit roundup. So let's see if I can just find it right away.
I'll go to the meltdown.
There's a long history of White Houses lying about the president's health, JFK, FDR, etc. The distinction here is the incompetence. And actually, it's something more than that, as one of the commentators pointed out. If JFK has Addison's or FDR has cardiovascular issues, or he's even in a wheelchair, they're not going to give that to somebody else.
That's true.
Right? So it's
Even
not just, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. So somebody said, we straight up lied to you yesterday, but you have to believe us today. And Jonathan Swan took that tweet and commented on it. This is literally, objectively, what's being asked of us. So he was not happy about any of this. And he goes and he writes, West Wing meltdown. The White House crisis of competence and credibility grew during a botched weekend that left even White House aides dismayed and befuddled. Many complained bitterly about the leadership of Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. We know that because Hugh Hewitt was tweeting this morning about how wonderful Mark Meadows was and how he was the hero of the whole thing. Okay. A senior White House official told him. That senior White House official being Mark Meadows.
Oh, okay.
Right? After days of internal and external snafus, as the virus spread through all levels of the White House, President Trump left his hospital suite just before 5:30 p.m. yesterday and took an SUV ride outside Walter Reed to wave at his supporters, most of whom are QAnon and Proud Boys, who have lined the road ever since he arrived Friday evening. Trump wore a mask, but the stunt risked exposing the Secret Service agents in the Suburban. Two senior White House staffers said they thought the PR stunt was selfish and compounded a weekend of horrible decisions, and everybody was immediately reminded of when he used tear gas to clear a path so he can walk to a church for a PR stunt. White House spokesman Judd Deere said appropriate precautions were taken in the execution of this movement. You're not supposed to execute the Secret Service. To protect the president and all those supporting it, including PPE. The movement was cleared by the medical team as safe to do. It was not. Exactly. Okay. In fact, we know it was not because a attending physician at Walter Reed tweeted that this is terrible. I've never seen anything like this. What idiot would ever approve of such a thing?
Yes. Well, only the chief
I'm paraphrasing him, but that's what he said. So frustration and anxiety built among White House staffers who say they went days with no internal communication from Meadows, and this goes on to say that nobody told the White House staff he was sick. They didn't have any a direction, whereas the vice president and the first lady staff said, don't come in, work from home.
Yes, right, okay.
And several staffers told Axios they were furious with Meadows. Remember, he's the chief of staff. It's his job to watch out for his staff. He's the
staff,
chief
that's right.
of the staff.
I get you now.
That's his job.
I knew that meant something.
Right? He did nothing to protect them. And they hate him.
How fun. Yeah, they're all very upset. Not all of them are, have access to the press, but a couple of them get word out.
Do. West Wing staff were privately circulating an unsparing indictment by Politico's Tim Alberta how Mark Meadows became the White House's unreliable source. A senior White House official defended the chief. Mark is extraordinarily accessible and caring. Another senior official said peanut gallery criticism like this is absurd and unfair, yada, yada, yada. They hate him. The White House's public communication about the virus has been a debacle of deception and contradictory information. The White House physician, Navy Commander Dr. Sean Conley, admitted at yesterday's briefing he painted an overly rosy picture. On Saturday, after Conley's pep talk, Meadows took reporters aside and gave at first anonymously a more worrisome snapshot. This is one of those situations where Meadows told them this anonymously, but they had a camera picture of Meadows telling them this anonymously, and so they told everybody it was Meadows telling us this anonymously.
Yeah. Jonathan Karl apparently got pissed about this whole thing and announced what got announced as his new rule.
Right? If anybody lies to me, I will tell you who they are. Yeah. That's been the standard in journalism. If you burn, if you get burned by a source, that's been true forever.
Yeah, not a whole lot of people actually.
It's like Twitter saying if you say something mean about Donald Trump, we'll get rid of the tweet.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to say you want him to die. We'll get rid of the tweet. Well, it's supposed to be your policy forever. You just don't do it against women or anybody else.
Yeah, well, that's true. Oh, yeah, lots of great stories about all the people who've never been protected by that before. But if you're Donald Trump, you get it. Well, okay, no surprise there. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Not only that Jonathan Karl thought it was, someone else was actually commenting on Jonathan Karl's statement of policy and saying that it was something, there was a new policy for him. But the idea that it was even his policy, it's not new and it's not his. But thank you for the comment.
Now, things you have to keep in mind here, okay? There's at least 3 White House correspondents who have turned positive.
Yes, true.
Because of the incompetence and ineptitude of the White House. And Chris Christie, who was part of the debate prep.
Yeah, right.
Who was positive, okay?
Which
went on ABC as an analyst about the debate, which is ridiculous right there.
I mean, just
paying attention to Christie, who's a known liar, is ridiculous anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
But participating in the debate and then explaining how the debate went is absurd. But nonetheless, he did it. He turns out to be positive, and so everybody on ABC who was in contact with him now has to be in quarantine. What I'm saying is the reporters themselves have also been put at risk by this whole debacle, and they're not happy about it.
And they've got
That's one of the reasons why Jonathan Swan was really ticked off. Sure, it is true that professionally speaking, lying to reporters is something they do not take lightly and do not like. But putting their lives at risk while you're lying to the reporters, no. And they're not going to get very nice coverage from now until the end of the election season.
Which is coming soon.
Very soon.
Yeah.
So 2 political pieces from Politico, which I think are quite relevant. This one says, Biden looks to seal election after Trump's week from hell. Now it's a Democrat traversing the battleground map and the president stuck inside.
Basement. Right.
Okay. The Biden campaign, under strict orders for the candidate not to speak ill of Trump personally while he's in the hospital, announced it's pulling its negative ads. So
the only one to do so.
Why? You don't need them. Trump is his own negative ad.
That's true too.
Why waste the money? An advisor said that Biden doesn't need to say much about Trump's struggles to contain coronavirus because now that the president is hospitalized, it's pretty obvious. It's harder and harder to see how Trump wins. What's his argument? Said the advisor, who was not authorized to speak for attribution. Donald Trump did everything to pretend coronavirus didn't exist. Now there's no way he can escape it. Oh, by the way, his campaign manager, Bill Stepien, also positive.
Yes, that's true, too. And somebody did make the great observation that every single campaign manager he's ever had has either now COVID positive or has been arrested. Yeah, not all of them are currently in jail. That's true. But they've all either been since arrested or stricken down by COVID.
Right. So the second article is entitled Republicans gripped by dread as multiple crises swirl. The presidency, control of the Senate, and even a quick confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett are all in doubt less than a month from the election.
Yes.
First, there's the president. Lindsey Graham's problem. His real condition is much a mystery to Graham as anybody else because nobody really knows what the president is doing because we can't believe anything anybody says. Then there's the Supreme Court. The virus has forced 6 Republican senators, 3 who have tested positive, into quarantine for at least 2 weeks. 2 of them, Tillis and Lee, are on the Senate Judiciary. Okay, Trump had immediately recognized how the enemy, the virus, could derail the plan. On Friday, Graham said Trump asked him about Barrett, and the senator assured him, we're moving on. But that becomes harder and harder as it becomes more and more obvious that they're doing this at all costs. And so the political costs, therefore, rise when you do that. And then finally, Graham was dealing with his own reelection, and he had that debate with Jamie Harrison. And Jamie Harrison did well and just kept nailing Graham on, you're a liar, you're lying, we can't trust your word. Jamie's a smart guy, Graham said. He held his own, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good.
Donate. But the line that struck me in this particular piece here is they're talking about the fact, well, maybe it'll help Trump because now people will be sympathetic. That's not happening. We know that from Ipsos polling that came out after Trump was admitted that actually shows, if anything, a small swing to Biden. And an Arizona poll that's still in the field had the same effect, according to Nate Cohen, who's running the poll. A senior Republican congressional official spoke for many by arguing that the handling of the issue of the weekend was incredibly worrying, but that it was too early to judge whether the issue further jeopardized Trump's reelection, the Barrett nomination, or GOP control of the Senate, because all of those things hinge on what happened this week, and that's why this weekend was so important. Do people show sympathy because he's sick and is trying to battle through this, or do they say, you're the president, And if you had taken common sense precautions, there's no way you would have gotten sick. If it becomes you're reckless, and this is the metaphor for how reckless he was, we're facing a tsunami.
Cool. We're facing a tsunami.
The official added one caveat. I referred to this earlier. A scenario he believed would crush the GOP. If the White House lied about the timeline and he went to events and was around people knowing he was COVID positive, I think this is the single biggest thing that would resonate with regular people in terms of how irresponsible he was. That could turn this into a death spiral. I think it's already in a death spiral. I think that's happening. I think the polling suggests that, but we'll need more of it, obviously. And that's why I started the segment with everything they're telling you is a lie. You cannot feel sympathy for people when you know they are lying to you. If there was a sympathy vote to have, if there was a sympathy effect, a rally around the president because he's sick, he has blown it himself by being Trump, because Trump is Trump and you can't change him. So by blustering, lying, putting people in that Suburban at risk with the stupid drive-by that had no purpose, everything about this takes that away. Because as soon as you start to think, well, any human should feel bad for any other, oh my God, what did he just do? That's the reaction people have.
Well, it's hard not to have that reaction.
It's impossible not to have that reaction.
I have not had that reaction. Or have I? Which one was it? What were we talking about again?
You can't look at him and say, I feel sorry for him.
Right.
You can't.
I definitely
because
have not
everything
done that.
he does, even something 5 seconds ago, makes it, no, I can't feel sorry for him.
I definitely don't. That's where I am. Well, I think it's increasingly hard for a lot of people, and it's natural to feel this way. The guy has been endangering. At a minimum, you have to say, well, look, he was asking for it. He's endangering himself at every turn in the hopes that you would endanger yourself in imitation. If you're not that stupid, congratulations.
Well, when I put the pundit roundup together this morning,
yes,
I wrote, the most irresponsible thing about Trump is that knowing what's going on, he's doing irresponsible things.
Yes, that's bad.
Even after he found out that he was positive, he's still lying. He's still doing irresponsible things. There is no possible way he's going to get a sympathy vote. And sympathy votes are for people who already like him, who are looking for justification as to why they still like him. That's quite different than, I'm on the fence, I'm an undecided voter, this is going to make me vote for him. Remember, most of the undecided voters at this point are, first of all, deciding whether or not to vote, and second of all, are mostly disaffected Republicans who would prefer to vote for his economic policies and less taxes and maybe a conservative judge, but because Trump's behavior has been so egregious, they can't bring themselves to vote, and that's their dilemma, and that's why they're undecided. So how does lying and putting everybody at risk bring those voters to Trump's side? And the answer is it doesn't.
Oh, well,
there's no way that's going to happen. It's impossible.
That makes it easy. You would think there is someone crazy enough somewhere, but it might just be the one.
The polls don't say it.
Yeah.
And this is where the polls come in, because you have fear that somehow or other it's going to help him, and then you have the reality that it's not. Just like, oh my gosh, there's unrest in Kenosha. That's going to help Trump. No. Just like everything else that was going to help Trump isn't helping Trump. So here's an article from the Miami Herald today. Joe Biden moves ahead of President Trump among Miami-Dade Hispanic voters, poll finds.
Well, that's solved.
Cuban-American voters continue to favor President Donald Trump over Joe Biden in Miami-Dade County. More are moving toward the Democratic nominee, boosting Biden's chances of winning. Battleground Florida, conducted October 1 to 4, beginning 2 days after the first Trump-Biden debate, and the day before Trump announced he had contracted coronavirus. And this was released ahead of Biden's visit today to Miami.
Okay.
The poll of 600 likely voters found Biden leading Trump 57-37 in Miami-Dade County. That's a 20-point lead, and that's quite consistent with the leads Obama had in Florida.
Right. Okay.
It's an increase from when Biden was leading 55-38. So Trump dropped a point and Biden went up 2 points. That was from a month ago. And we still have Mike Bloomberg dropping a ton of money and Biden visiting, and Trump is not visiting because he's still in the hospital. So that's the latest poll that's out. The other polls that we have out that I think are certainly worth mentioning this morning, we have the Usc Dornsife poll, which is currently in their Biden plus 12 cycle here. Okay. And if you look closely at their, and that's over a 14-day, which kind of evens things out. But if you look over the 7-day version of it, there's been a spike for Biden over the past day, which may reflect the people actually starting to get the idea that that debate was awful for him. And we know that that debate was awful for him because the NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out over the weekend, and that showed a 14-point lead for Biden, up from 8. And specifically in the poll, they said, and this is a poll post-debate but pre-admission to hospital, that particular poll just said, people thought Trump did incredibly poorly. Biden was 53, which is plus 2 since last month. Trump was 39, which is minus 4 since last month. Who did a better job in the debate? Biden 49, Trump 24, equally 1. Either was good, 17. Not sure, 9. This was not the Insta poll of people who watched the debate. This is everybody. So this is the debate filtered through the water cooler discussions later. Right.
Who did a better job?
And the consensus was half the population said Biden did better. A quarter said Trump did better. That's his true base.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were turned off, but not the way these stupid focus groups that people show you, which are the disaffected Republicans having trouble, reconciling their hatred of Trump with hatred of Democrats, all of whom get their information from Fox News. I want to vote for Biden, but, he's senile, and after all, he's a socialist. But then again, I looked at what Trump was doing, and I can't vote for him either. What to do? That's what most of these people are. And, I'm getting sick and tired of listening to them because, okay, fine. You're disaffected Republicans. Do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. He's losing anyway.
Yep. Huzzah. And they're making each other sick in that diner.
Biden's national lead over Trump jumps to 14 points after debate. The clear loser from the debate was Donald Trump, said Democratic pollster Jeff Horwit of Hart Research, who conducted this survey with Republican pollster Bill McInturff of Public Opinion Strategies. And at least for the short term, this has damaged his standing against Joe Biden. But McInturff cautions the survey could represent a shock to the system right after a consequential debate. And as a result, McInturff believes the race could return to the stable 8 to 9 point margin where it's essentially been over the last several months, which is still a difficult place for an incumbent 4 weeks before an election.
Yes.
So at best, it represents the fact that things are breaking for Biden, which means landslide. And at worst, it means Biden continues with an 8 or 9 point lead, which means he has a solid win.
All right.
And that's basically where things stand.
I am happy to hear that. And we get closer and closer. We're inside of a month anyway, November 3rd, and it being October 5th, if you measure things that way. So, yes, home stretch. And I appreciate that the president would infect himself with COVID in the middle of all this, just to help us drive this point home.
Well, if it wasn't clear, it was nice of them to make it clear. Important polls that came out over the weekend besides that, YouGov poll, Pennsylvania, Biden plus 7. Pennsylvania's looking solid for Biden at this point. So that means Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And Ohio in the YouGov poll was tied. And we're expecting an Arizona poll today or tomorrow from Siena, New York Times. Siena did Pennsylvania on October 3rd, and Biden was plus 7. Siena did Florida. These are the New York Times polls. And released on October 3rd, and Biden was plus 5.
Okay.
So you have solid performances in Florida and Pennsylvania. We're waiting on Arizona. And if the Arizona poll comes out and looks good, then you can say, look, the national polls are looking pretty good for Biden. Reuters had a plus 10. And, we have the plus 14 from NBC, Wall Street Journal. We have the plus 12 from USC Dornsife. And then the state polls are looking good. We have Pennsylvania and Florida and maybe Arizona to come. And if that's the case, Trump's losing. And so that's why you have all the doom and gloom stuff from his his own people. And I would just add, and I want to hunt this down because I don't have it handy,
I'm looking.
but Josh Marshall was quoting some bonkers stuff last night.
Oh.
About things that he was seeing about the campaign strategy.
Oh. Who's
that the Trump campaign was hoping to do.
All right.
Okay.
Light the Washington Monument on fire.
Well, basically.
Worse.
Let's see if we can track this down now that I found his account. It should be easy because it was just last night.
Release the P-tape to distract from his taxes. Yeah. I don't know. What?
And he says, this is 10 hours ago, he says, this is just insane levels of karmic energy.
Demand a rebate of
I'll give you the
$750.
tweet there. He says,
okay.
And he's got a screenshot of something. I don't quite know where it's from.
Let's see.
It says, the other side, Trump campaign officials privately admit that his diagnosis has blown up many of their plans in the sprint to November.
Okay.
The Trump campaign was planning to zero in on its Biden's hiding in the basement rhetoric for the rest of the month.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
all of October.
Not going to work now.
And, well, it wasn't working then.
Well, that's
since Biden is out on the trail.
Yeah, but now it's just on its face.
But you have to put how stupid it was even without this admission to the hospital.
On your face.
Biden's hiding in the basement rhetoric for the rest of the month and draw a sharp contrast between the energy seen at Trump's massive rallies and the slimmer crowds at Biden's events. Trump was planning to hold campaign rallies and hobnob with donors in battleground states for the majority of October. But with Trump in quarantine, that won't work. His plan was stupid. His campaign are idiots. It was failing before this, and then we have this.
Yeah.
So that's my summary for the weekend. That's everything.
I think it's a good one.
Wednesday.
All right. Well, let's do it that way then. Fine. I'll read the rest of the show. Thank you very much for coming by. There's a lot to digest, and we're only about a quarter of the way through it.
It's our Monday Chaos show. So
okay. Good. Continue with tradition. See you then. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg's all done for the day and saving up his energy for a Wednesday recap. Things will only get crazier between now and then. I was stuck on the Josh Marshall tweet. This is a good way to end because it gives us something else to talk about and segue to the rest of the craziness. I'm looking at the screen grab that he's taken, and yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. He might tweet out a link later on, but it looks like any one of a number of write-ups could be Axios type stuff. I guess we could Google the actual text and see if we can identify where, but it doesn't really matter that much. But building on Greg's point of just it being a terrible plan, it was a terrible plan for a number of reasons. The chief reason being it wasn't working at all anyway. And then add on top of it the idea that the plan was to spend October saying Biden's hiding in the basement. That plan hadn't worked for August and September. But in addition, now you're hiding in the basement. And it was just always a bad plan. I mean, they wouldn't have acknowledged it going into things. But, if there was a doctor on staff, he might have said, maybe that's not the approach heading into, flu season. And an expected second wave and us being lax about controls for the virus. But, of course, if you don't believe the virus is a real thing or it can possibly reach you because your genes are too good or you're too rich and that makes a difference somehow, then I guess that's never going to enter into the calculus. And also they can't do calculus. So there's no chance that they were ever going to get this right. All right, let's see. I don't even know where to begin with all of this. But let's see. I'm just going to have to open up Pocket and the Twitter stream and just kind of remind myself of all the dumb things that got said. You know what? Here's something. Why don't we go over, it's as random as anything else. A New York Times piece, which might help change the tenor of coverage. I noted yesterday someone's tweet observing that Maggie Haberman had, at long last, permitted herself to use the big L word in tweeting about how the Trump administration was approaching things, and to say that the lying has been stunning. And that was kind of interesting all by itself. Where was that? I think it was probably yesterday morning, I'll say about brunch time, that I happened to notice that and retweet it. So it's in my timeline somewhere. I thought that was interesting and telling that she would say that. And, of course there was, it needed to be said, but of course the reaction from out here in Twitterland was a mix of, thank God she finally said it, and but more heavily weighted to, how could this be so stunning to you? This has been going on forever, but you've never wanted to say it. Yeah, here it is. So it's going on about 22 hours ago. The lying from the White House on Friday and from Conley on yesterday about the president's condition is staggering. That's the word, not stunning, but staggering. And there it is. So all right, I'll put this on the record here and put it away in pocket for you to see. I thought that was kind of interesting. And in that vein, I take you to another New York Times writer, and maybe this is a harbinger of sorts. It is Ben Smith. You remember BuzzFeed Ben, who's now Ben New York Times. He's moved over to the New York Times. What a stepping stone that was, founding BuzzFeed and building it into a product and then using it to jump over to the New York Times. Very interesting. Greg's chiming in with another quick note, so I'll keep an eye out on that one. But this I think is interesting for the possibility of changing the tenor of the discourse in the papers. Anyway, oh yes, but before I go, I'll jump over here to the quickie hit that Greg is sending us. It's a polling thing, and I did see this. I thought I've seen some other people discussing this one as well, so seems like an important one. PPP, public policy polling, noting in their tweet here, we've done about 70 private polls this week. And a very noticeable trend we're seeing, especially the last few days, is that where before Biden was getting maybe 6 to 8% of 2016 Trump voters, you understand that, the phrasing tripped me up in trying to read it, but 6 to 8% of the people who voted for Trump in 2016 are now switching and saying, I'm going to go with Biden. That's what they were seeing. But now that's pretty consistently starting to be more like 10 to 12%. And as others who saw this pointed out on Twitter, and I'm sure Greg would point out if he were still on this morning, and probably will point it out again on Wednesday, the 6 to 8% switching was probably enough, should be, mathematically enough to doom Trump to start with. Remember, of course, the margin in the 3 states that made the electoral college difference was just 80,000 votes. And, 6 to 8% of Trump's vote is much more than that. But I guess in that sense, it depends on how it's distributed and which states it was happening in. But for 6 to 8%, if it was nationally 6 to 8% of Trump voters were changing their minds and now going up to 10 to 12%, that should pretty much do it. I guess there exists the possibility if it was all in states which were overwhelmingly blue anyway, it could have no electoral college effect. But yeah, I don't know that that's the case. That would be kind of a weird thing, and you would think that they would make note of that we're seeing this shift, but only in places where it doesn't make any difference. But for also the fact that they've done 70 private polls, the possibility that it exists, I guess. We did all 70 private polls were in California. I don't think that's likely to happen either. So anyway, take it for what it's worth, but it's an interesting trend, and it's helpful when you're trying to build a case for the fact that, Trump's losing and you should just say so, as Greg frequently reminds us. I think it fits in nicely. Now, just jumping back to where Ben Smith was leading us after Maggie Haberman's comments on Twitter. But again, so far, not in print, I don't think, anywhere for Maggie Haberman. But who knows? I didn't go and look. But you would think it would be hard to come back on a Monday and not express that sentiment and not do it in the same words. But who knows? Sometimes what you put on Twitter, the editors say different about. Right? So this piece from Ben Smith, I thought, though, was fascinating. And just the headline. And I wonder whether he wrote and or fought for this headline. And the headline by itself, one, grabbed me, and two, I think can help change the tenor. And I think that's exactly what he's looking for. How to cover a sick old man. This is a New York Times headline after this weekend, or in the middle of this weekend, because I guess he published it yesterday. How to cover a sick old man. The president is hospitalized and reporters are fighting for basic facts. What should elderly leaders, and it notes here many of America's top politicians are over 80, reveal about their health? It's more than just about Trump. This is sort of a historical review of this situation, and I think relatively round condemnation of how we've handled it in the past. But here's the way Ben writes it up. When John Bresnahan was starting out as a reporter in the mid-1990s, he approached Senator Strom Thurmond. You remember that guy? Senator of South Carolina, run for president in 1948 as a segregationist, and as he says, still at that point shuffling through the Capitol. Senator Thurmond, born in 1902, gave no indication that he'd understood Mr. Bresnahan's question and responded with a non sequitur. So he approaches him in the hall, asks a question, and he gets this weird non sequitur. The young reporter saw his older colleagues shaking their heads and snickering. The kid had expected the elderly senator to be able to carry on a conversation. What an idiot, right? They didn't report, these other guys. They didn't report on Senator Thurmond's infirmity. That wasn't how things were done. But they all knew about it. They just didn't tell you because it's only the major function of the press, but F the whole thing, right? These days, Mr. Bresnahan is the congressional bureau chief for Politico, a Navy veteran with the demeanor of a guy you've dragged out of a dive bar in the 8th inning of the Yankees game. I don't even know what demeanor that is, but Ben does. He has become Capitol Hill's Grim Reaper, a rare reporter with the stomach to print some obvious truths. We'll see about that. That some top lawmakers aren't all there. So again, right now, the focus, lawmakers. Don't get upset with us, all you Trump supporters who are listening to the show. In 2017, Mr. Bresnahan and his colleague Anna Palmer wrote that the powerful Republican chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Thad Cochran, was, quote, frail and disoriented. Where did they write that? In Politico. And this was a story, of course, that sped Cochran's retirement. Last month, Mr. Bresnahan and Marianne Levine reported that fellow Democrats were worried whether Dianne Feinstein was up to leading her side of the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings because she gets, quote, confused by reporters' questions or will offer different answers to the same question depending on where or when she's asked. And that's something I've noticed as well. And I couldn't decide what to make of it exactly when she was being asked, well, what about if we win back the Senate and have to play constitutional hardball? Where are you on maybe elimination of the filibuster, statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico if they want it, expansion of the Supreme Court? What about all these things? And, she seemed to kind of poo-poo all of those things. And everybody thought, oh, my God, Feinstein, because she actually has a history of doing that. But I also think that the answer can change depending on circumstances. And here it would be a legitimate change if the circumstances are, well, I've had a talking to from the leadership and they say, look, this is going forward, period. And I either get on the bandwagon or get out of the way because it's time for us to make some very hard choices about who's really going to chair the Judiciary Committee. And if we don't have you on board for some very, very important parliamentary machinations, well, we'd rather have someone who was. and the votes are there. And so do you change your mind now? Oh, yes, I've just realized I've changed my mind. That would be compared to I forgot what I said the other day and I don't remember my own positions, a more legitimate arrival at that conclusion. But I always take what she says with a small grain of salt because I've seen that scenario play out, and I've seen her say no, yes. And I always thought it was because there was some behind the scenes pressure, but I suppose it's possible that it's because she doesn't remember the no's. I don't know. I'm not certain, but it's an interesting possibility. But it's not even the one we're here for chiefly. So moving on, this kind of reporting, Ben says, is impolite. It's also totally obvious and a natural feature of America's recent slide toward gerontocracy. On Capitol Hill, everyone, quote, knows this stuff, Mr. Bresnahan said. I am just the one to write it. Okay. I was thinking of Mr. Bresnahan as I watched reporters arrayed at Walter Reed Military Hospital on Sunday, facing yet another moment of crisis for the news media, one even more basic than many of the hard challenges of the Trump era. Let me use this as a moment to inject this aside. Monica has tweeted us here a good confirmation of why what I had in mind and why I was confused about Walter Reed. Walter Reed Hospital moved at some point to the Bethesda Navy Hospital location a few years ago. It used to be in the Silver Spring area, and I don't think I knew where it was even when it was separate, but my recollection, most of the experience I had in discussing anything about Walter Reed was when I worked on Capitol Hill, and that was more than a couple of years ago. And I guess I just remember the way things were, and I'm nostalgic for that. I had no idea that they had moved the facility, but good. That means a save for my addled brain there. Thanks, Monica, for chiming in with that one. And let's see, I got some other notes I want to get to here, but maybe at a different point in the story. So Ben was telling us he was thinking of Bresnahan when he was outside of Walter Reed covering this circus. The White House press corps is trying to perform a fundamental job of journalism, delivering simple facts about President Trump's condition in the face of Trump's years of casual fabrication and his doctor's clumsy evasions and contradictions. They're covering the biggest policy failure of his administration in the most literal sense imaginable. And yet, they're also doing something obviously uncomfortable. It's hard not to feel some human revulsion for the sight of healthy, TV-ready young journalists braying for the vital signs of a sick old man. But there is no question that this prying is in the urgent public interest, and that he's a sick old man, I would say. And the White House press corps is working with admirable aggression and openness. We need to know who is in charge of the government, and to understand the outcome of President Trump's long evasion of the coronavirus crisis as Americans begin to vote. It's an extremely important point, shouldn't be glossed over. We need to know who's running the government. One of the things that had me a little bit worried, besides the fact that this was a very stupid photo op thing that they were putting out of him signing the papers, I'm actually kind of concerned about the operational security of having a president who's got COVID and is zonked out on COVID drugs, including some that might cause psychotic episodes, signing blank pieces of paper, which are then whisked off to God knows where and into who knows whose hands. I don't know, the White House is full of freelancing Nazis, and I don't know what they're doing with signatures from a blank piece of paper that Trump doesn't, maybe even remember doing. And even if he does remember doing, I was just doing it for the pictures. I crumpled it up and ate it. I don't know what happened to the damn thing. And as somebody, I was pointing that out on Twitter, and somebody said, there's nothing that Stephen Miller hasn't been able to convince Trump to do, so it's not like he's got anything waiting in the wings. Although, again, I would point out, one, we wouldn't know, and two, I guess we can say this now, if there ever was anything that Trump said no to Miller, there isn't one now, because there's some signatures floating around, and Trump has no idea what happened to them. And I don't know, maybe they are getting cut and pasted onto some new executive orders. This is what he did. After all, they faked the whole day of work for him. That would be put him in an interesting position to have to claim, I never signed that. I didn't really do a full day's work. It was just 5-10 minutes of sitting around for photos. Oh, well, that changes everything. Yeah, well, he's not going to admit to that. All right, well, back to the story here about sick old men and how to cover them. By refusing to speak honestly about basic facts, the White House is really annihilating the press's role, said Elizabeth Drew, a former New Yorker magazine Washington correspondent who covered President Ronald Reagan's shooting in 1981 and his staff's success at playing down the grave risk to his life. Physical decline is likely to be a major feature of the next few years of American politics, at least. The current line of succession after Trump and Pence features Nancy Pelosi, who is 80, and the Senate President pro tem Charles Grassley, who's 87, who also runs the Senate Finance Committee. Pelosi's two most powerful deputies in the House, Jim Clyburn and Steny Hoyer, are both 80 or older. Over in the Senate, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee is 85 and coasting to re-election. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee is 86. Joe Biden, who turns 78 next month, is nearly a year younger than the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who's also seeking re-election this November. This concentration of power in the hands of the old is an American phenomenon. Derek Thompson recently wrote in The Atlantic, noting that our leaders are getting older as European leaders get younger. If government of the elderly, by the elderly, and for the elderly will not perish from the earth, by the way, it will, the rest of us might suffer instead, he lamented. But, this is what happens. They perish from the earth, because that's where they are. But it also means that journalists must get past the taboos and be frank about the normal process of aging, and must emulate Mr. Bresnahan's stomach for blunt truths. Typically, whispers about age and health have remained on the margins of the political conversation, often driven by the right-wing aggregator Matt Drudge, whose visceral grasp of news has always included obsessions with age and health. Is that right? Sounds right, though it felt partisan. In 2007, Mr. Drudge briefly capsized the presidential campaign with news of a new spot on John McCain's head, for instance. His site consumed, to the dismay of Mr. Trump's supporters, with the president's illness. It is consumed. One of Drudge's 18 headlines about Mr. Trump's condition on Sunday morning, 18, was "Blind Mystic Predicted It." Okay, well, I guess you can discount pretty much most of what's on Drudge. You could anyway, but that'll help you do it if you somehow were stuck. Among the people scrambling this weekend at American newspapers are obituary writers, as major outlets assigned top reporters to update Mr. Trump's obituary, which they keep at the ready, just in case. Peter Baker at the New York Times, Mark Fisher at the Washington Post, and Mark Z. Barabak at the Los Angeles Times. People at each paper told me, so now you know who to blame if it comes off too rosy, I guess. But the easiest solution to this media quandary is for citizens to elect leaders of a working age. A friend recently told me, sadly, how nice it had been to see a national politician, Kamala Harris, jog down a few stairs. But for the next few years, at least, our leaders' age and health will remain big news. We need a reporting culture that's ready to handle the public decline of this generation of leaders, as long as they insist on declining in public. Searching questions about everything from sleep to cognition shouldn't be off limits. It will help if reporters are medically knowledgeable, that's probably a good point, and ask the right questions. For example, blood pressure, heart rhythm, sleep disorders. Dr. Mark Fisher, a professor of neurology and political science at the University of California of Irvine, told me on Sunday. How about that? So if you're attending at Irvine, you can have the same professor for neurology and political science. That's really, I have never seen that combination. Gotta exist somewhere. Now we know where. The more specific and precise questions reporters ask, the better. A robust fund of knowledge by the reporter is a great advantage. I guess it's easy to say that if you're a professor of neurology and political science, that you should combine the two. I think what should really happen here is that Mark Fisher should quit his job and be a reporter. But I guess the second most convenient solution is that reporters should read up a little bit on gerontology, let's say. When politicians won't share honest results, health experts' long-range diagnoses should be treated as news. The whispers by reporters and lawmakers' aides about feeling as if they work in a nursing home should find their way onto the record. And the most powerful people in the country should learn from Mr. Trump's disastrous example that if you lie consistently about your health, nobody will believe you in a crisis. If only there was some sort of fable or parable that taught that if you were, for instance, felt, imperiled in some way, perhaps by a wolf, and you cried about it too often when it wasn't true, what might happen? Well, you get the idea. We all know the parable. It's just interesting that it makes no difference in reporting. Well, anyway, none of this comes easily. Reporters are human beings, and we cover these people, Mr. Bresnan told me. You have respect for who the person was. That's an interesting way of putting it. It's difficult. So that's it. I thought it was a good point. Not even chiefly about Trump, so you can't complain. But honestly, Trump is a very sick old man, and you should cover him as such. Now I've made it about Trump, and that should make it easier for the rest of you. Okay, so we got that out of the way. Couple other comments that I thought might help enlighten a little bit. Darwin Darko chimes in with this, and this helps make sense of what we were hearing from Chris Wallace and the people who produced the debate. Because on the one hand, we heard, Trump arrived, quote unquote, late, and so therefore couldn't be subjected to the testing regimen, and basically, I think calculated out, they're not going to stop me from going onto the stage and having the debate, and they're not going to delay the debate either. The test is not as important to them as all that. And I guess the rules were everybody shows up and gets tested with one of the rapid tests. You got to show up at X time so that there's enough time to do that. And Trump blew that off and Biden didn't. But I think we then perhaps jumped to the conclusion that Wallace and Biden both did, in fact, take the tests while Trump did not. But then there was this discussion of that I guess Chris Wallace had said in discussing things that there had been a honor system, that the campaigns had to rely on the honor system. And I was confused a little bit by that, but I didn't stop on it to think about why it didn't make sense. That, well, if it's on the honor system, then what's the testing about? What's the honor? That you're going to show up and take the test? I mean, you were going to fail having an honor system with Trump involved in it anyway. But what do you mean honor system? And now it seems to make sense. Darwin indicates that Chris Wallace, in being interviewed, or I guess he was being interviewed or / discussing the situation on Fox News, said what makes it sound like, well, once Trump showed up late, they said, all right, well, to hell with it. It's the honor system for everybody. So I don't know whether the deal was you're supposed to show up at this time and get tested. Biden showed up, Wallace showed up, Trump didn't. I would have thought that at that point they would say, well, all right, we'll go ahead with your test, Mr. Biden, and your test, Mr. Wallace. And then when Trump shows up, I'm sure he'll be here any time because, this is super important to everybody and the health of the nation. And we'll test him when he gets there. And then he doesn't show up and then he doesn't get tested. It shows incredible foresight, if this is the case, that they said, well, the agreement is that you'll both get tested at the same time. Well, I'm not going first, you go first. All right, together, 1, 2, 3, test. As they both, I don't know, lick a spoon. I don't know how you do the saliva test. And I assume that was a rapid test that they used for this. But whoever it is gets points for foresight that Trump might, in fact, blow the thing off. And it would be somehow unfair to test Biden, although really, honestly, Biden should have said, as a matter of policy, I'm happy to be tested. It's good to test yourself. So maybe that's how it happened. And so Darwin says that Chris Wallace indicates in this discussion on Fox News that neither campaign was tested, probably because Trump blew the whole thing up by showing up late on purpose. And that makes much more sense. Thanks, Darwin, for straightening that one out. Time now for our last break and then heading into our last segment. So we'll have a 2-minute opportunity to choose the juiciest and most crucial stories. I'll probably blow it and choose something else instead, but that's the nature of the show. And I think at this point you probably consumed all of this information as voraciously as I did over the weekend, and so it's the little things that get pointed out here by me, by Greg, by Darwin, by Monica, and others chiming in. Thanks very much for helping produce the show and making it what it is. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. All right. Here's kind of what I think might be the most KITM direction we can take after this. Lots of people wondering about what does it mean now that so many Republican senators have fallen ill with COVID-19. And we'll get a couple of pop-up ads out of the way. And I think we can approach this problem and with an amalgam of writing and discussion that took place on Twitter and elsewhere about it. Let's see. Let me start off, I guess I'll say, by cautioning a little bit. There is still nothing standing in the way, absolutely, of the completion of a floor vote approving Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. And there's still very little that can be done to actually prevent it from happening. But things could, circumstances could conspire. And that was always at the bottom of all of my own thinking and my own advice, such as it was, about how to handle this, was that this all came down to essentially delay for the sake of delay, because you never know what's going to happen. And there's not a whole lot of time left in the Trump administration, not a whole lot of time left before the election. There's still the lame duck period, and that's more time than you can usually consume with delaying tactics like this. But you could force it to post-election, but I don't know whether you want to force it to post-election, and maybe it's better that it, politically it's another question. Is it better if it's going to happen to have it happen before the election so there can be retribution if that's even out there to be had and isn't outweighed by celebration from the Trump base? I don't know. But I can't give you a definitive answer on. But even with COVID spreading like wildfire among Republicans, and it was also a very interesting weekend watching Republicans among the base talking about how curious and how suspicious it seemed that only Republicans were coming down with COVID in all of this. And, of course, it's not suspicious at all. The behavior dictates it. And or rather, the behavior dictates, I guess, some of the outcome in terms of what's going on. But as Greg always says, the virus dictates the story. There's a lot of things that the humans involved in all of this want. The virus doesn't care particularly about what they want to have done. It's going to proceed as it proceeds, and it can create, and perhaps it alone can create, a situation in which, they really can't get this nomination done. How? by striking down enough Republican senators over a long enough period of time that they just can't make things work. So now to explain some of the mechanics of that, because people began getting excited about the possibility now that Tom Tillis had tested positive, that Ron Johnson had tested positive, that who else had tested positive? Mike Lee had tested positive. Lee and Tillis being on the Judiciary Committee, somewhat more important. So the three of them have tested positive. I guess underlying all of this is Republicans are crazy and they don't believe or take medical advice on this stuff, even certainly haven't up until this point. We don't know that they won't start taking medical advice now that they actually have it and have to shut their big fat mouths about knowing more than the doctors about how to avoid getting it. But if Trump is any indication, he's clearly not chastened by having caught the virus such that he'll take and abide by medical advice. So a lot of people are sort of assuming that, well, if they have it, then they have to quarantine. And if they have to quarantine, then they can't be on the Senate floor to vote. And if they can't be on the Senate floor to vote, then they remember the mechanics that we've discussed about the difficulties that can present in getting anything done. If they don't, in a closely divided Senate, if you have enough senators absent such that you can't actually be sure that you'll be able to muster a majority of the votes there that day, that's a pretty serious problem. And an even bigger problem, if you've paid attention along the way, if you think you can't muster a quorum. And that gets people excited because they have seen, usually in state politics, the big to-do a few years ago in Texas, when the Texas State Senate Democrats made themselves scarce in an effort to deny the state Senate a quorum to do their various dirty work pieces of legislation, and it worked for a time. And so people figure the same thing can be done in the United States Senate, and for the most part, it can't. A quorum is determined differently in the Texas State Senate than it is here, I think, in the U.S. Senate, which is just a majority of senators, 51. People then asking questions, well, what about Mike Pence? If he's there, can he break a tie? Or if they only have 50, can he be the 51st? Technically, no. Quorum is defined as the number of actual sworn and serving senators, and he's not one. He's the president of the Senate, but he's not a senator. Can they just break that rule? I guess they could, but in order to do it, you need 51 votes, and if you can't produce the 50 votes or the 51 for the quorum, then you can't produce it for this either. So, but if he is the 51st vote, I guess, technically they could pull it off and say, well, let's change the rules so that I can also be the 51st for a quorum. So yeah, but again, you're really talking about very, very narrow margins. There's 53 Republican senators as it is, and if 3 of them are sick and you can only produce the other 50, then it's a real strong arm tactic. And not that it's beyond them, but it would be a pretty significant thing to do. Well, anyway, the simpler solution for that issue is to ask yourself this question. You're talking about Mike Lee, Tom Tillis, and Ron Johnson, right? And there will shortly be more, but right now you're talking about those 3. Which one of those 3 do you think, if all of this was on the line and they could not get, for instance, we'll stick with the Barrett nomination. They couldn't get the Barrett nomination done and put her on the Supreme Court unless one of them said, to hell with the quarantine, I'll put on a mask and I'll go there and I'm going to vote and I'll get on the floor and I'll say, look, if you think it's a bad idea to be in here with me, even though I'm wearing a mask, then get out. But I'm voting. If they're ambulatory, they'll vote. So it's by no means a sure thing that the fact that a normal person would say, I'm not going in there. I'll be endangering the health of 100 of the most important members of our government. So I ask you, which one of them is going to say that? Oh, I better not go. They'll all go. So you can't really count on anything. They have to be knocked on their ass by the virus, which can do it. Doesn't have to kill them. It just has to make, if they're intubated, they're not voting. So that's what we were talking about. They would have to be able to not be able to physically get themselves on the floor, not be out of breath when they do it, but cannot get there. Now, if that happens, then you got something serious. Then things can begin to change. I have a piece from David Dayen who kind of goes over the options, some of which apparently was informed by our discussion on Twitter on Saturday, so that was nice. But before I get into it, I will also caution you that there are some contrary takes out there from people who should know better, I think, but, who can say who should know better when it comes to Senate procedure? Nobody knows anything about Senate procedure. But people, I guess, who should, whatever. I say they should know better. I'm talking about Zephyr Teachout. So we might as well just blurt that out now. And it's not that I think, oh, what a dummy, she doesn't know this. Again, this is, esoteric stuff. And I think, you might say, well, she should know better. She ran for Congress at one point. But I think, didn't she run for the House, right? Not the Senate. So you might not familiarize yourself with Senate rules. And quite honestly, a lot of the people who serve in the Senate right now aren't that familiar with Senate rules. Anyway, she was probably just one of dozens of people saying that because, she's also motivated to do this. This is sort of where she comes from. She was tweeting, admonishing Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats, which is often a good thing to do in a situation like this, that they really had no choice but to, they really had to get it together, and all these Senate Democrats had to be there today to vote against a motion by, or at least first might be a unanimous consent request, and then later perhaps a motion from Mitch McConnell. McConnell, knowing that they could face trouble with producing the votes that they need, depending on how the medical situations work out on the three senators we know to be positive, not to mention the others who may yet come down with the disease, was said over the weekend to be interested in seeking unanimous consent and then maybe a motion to adjourn for 2 weeks. Now, that might strike you as a fine thing to do, and honestly, it is a fine thing to do at this point because it would delay their ability to bring the Barrett nomination to the floor within any time in the next 2 weeks because they won't be there to do it. Were they planning on moving it that quickly? I don't know. There's only, how many weeks to the election? 3-4 weeks? I should look at the calendar and figure that out. But they do seem interested in fast-tracking the nomination. That seems sure. And by fast-tracking, I really mean what they would do is say, we vetted her fairly recently for her seat on it. Is she on the 7th Circuit of Court of Appeals? And we vetted her then, and she passed muster then, and so everything should be fine now. Now, it's a totally different ball game moving from one court to another, and we learned that with Brett Kavanaugh, certainly. And, and it deserves more scrutiny. And although you get heightened scrutiny when you're under consideration for the circuit court versus the federal district courts, it's not enough. It doesn't set off the same panic alarm bells, and people don't look quite as deeply because there's more of them and they're less influential. And the vetting is proportional to the job. By the way, so about our voting, let's see, tomorrow the 6th is Tuesday, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks to the election. So if 2 of those weeks are spent in adjournment, that leaves them 2 weeks to, if they want to try to get this nomination taken care of before the election. And that's a pretty tight timeline. Now, so the situation is that McConnell was going to seek unanimous consent, and then everybody said, well, object. And I said, you know what, at this point I object too, because I haven't had a chance to think this through. And just as a good parliamentary procedure lesson for anybody who might find themselves working under parliamentary procedure and in the future for any reason, wherever you might be working, if somebody makes a unanimous consent request out of the blue and you are like torn for even a second, well, wait, what are they trying to do here? Object. Or if you really don't want to be objecting, they, at least in the Congress, they allow you to reserve the right to object and talk for a little while you process it in your head. But if you can't process it in your head and talk at the same time, object, and then you can approach the other side and say, let me give this a moment's thought here to see whether I really and truly object. But if not, if I can figure this out and it makes sense to me, I apologize for the delay, but you can go ahead and make the same unanimous consent request again. Now that I understand it, I won't object. So don't feel bad about objecting. Go ahead and object. They can always make the motion again. So at any rate, I would say you object just to give the caucus time to think about it. Then I realized, oh, this was on Saturday. He's not going to make this unanimous consent request today. It's on Monday, so we'll have plenty of time to think about it. Do you want it to happen by unanimous consent? Would you rather have a vote? Okay. Well, then you can object, and then he'll make the motion to adjourn. And then you can figure out what to do from there. But what Zephyr Teachout was telling everybody was, again, using this opportunity to sort of beat up on the Senate Democratic leadership, which is always a fun thing to do, but it's sort of stock and trade for her. And she said, everybody has to vote against McConnell's motion to adjourn because reasons. It wasn't entirely clear what she thought the reason was. She may have explained it, but now that I think about it, I can't bring it to mind. But like I said, I wanted to caution against this just because it's not the case necessarily that if Senate Democrats were to accede to this or vote for even the motion to adjourn, that it's necessarily any sort of caving to McConnell, because the outcome is the same either way. So here's what we've learned in our procedural lessons over the years. If you oppose McConnell's motion to adjourn, and I think the excitement here was he can't muster a majority anymore, so make him pay for it by defeating whatever it is he proposes. Except he's proposing adjournment and not working on the nomination for a while, for 2 weeks. And that's kind of what we want. And even if it isn't what we want, here's the thing. So you defeat his motion to adjourn, right? He can only muster the 50 votes for it, and at most, and some other people are sick, whatever. He can't. Let's say there are actually more Democrats show up, and they outvote them on the motion to adjourn. What happens at that point? Well, what happens at that point is McConnell just does what Democrats have been plotting to do. Remember that Democrats have been saying, okay, well, let's make the Republicans produce a majority as a quorum in order to stay in session so that they can process any bills and or work on the Barrett nomination, if that's what they want to do. If they can't muster enough senators because they're sick and we stay away during a quorum call, well, then they can't do any business. Now, keeping in mind that the result of not being able to produce a quorum is adjournment, you can see the problem. I mean, it's a good strategy if you don't want the Senate to be in session for whatever reason, and the other guys do. But if the other guys also don't want the Senate to be in session at the moment, then what's your leverage? You vote against McConnell's motion to adjourn and piss him off, but who cares, right? And then he says, fine, I suggest the absence of a quorum. And then he just tells all the Republicans, get on a plane and go home. We're done. And then what? Democrats try to produce a quorum on the Senate floor, which is what they were just trying to show you the Republicans couldn't do. To what end? And then, of course, they can't. There are 47 Democratic and Democratic voting senators, the two independents who caucus with them. You can bring all 47 to the floor. You still don't have a quorum. Don't have a quorum? The Senate adjourns, which is what I was asking you to do in the first place. But thank you very much for reversing the situation and making yourselves look like the a-holes. I wanted us to adjourn because there's a bunch of senators sick with COVID, and if we force them to come here and vote, they're going to make the rest of you sick. Now, you all said, oh, we love science. We know about masks. You're the ones that want to get in the room with the sick guys now. And I'm saying, you know what? You've convinced me. There's people getting sick now. Let's all take a break. There'll still be 2 weeks afterwards to deal with the Barrett nomination, and we'll see you then. For Democrats to get in the way of that, I think, seems a little foolish. But, of course, it's been set up by, well, in this case, Zephyr Teachout as, look at the, stupid Chuck Schumer caving into McConnell. How dare you? This is the time for us to stand up as one. And if you can't do it, then you need to be replaced. And I don't think that's a particularly good read of what's going on at the moment. So, what is going on at the moment? Well, I had David Dayen's piece here, which he published over at the American Prospect. I note the absence of a quorum. And in case there was any part of the procedural issues that you missed or didn't ever hear me explain or can't remember, this is the place to go for the backgrounder. 3 Republican senators in quarantine due to COVID-19 gives Democrats some new options, he wrote on Saturday. Senator Ron Johnson announced this morning that he was the 3rd Republican senator to contract the coronavirus. In the outbreak that has overtaken President Trump and the First Lady, like Senators Mike Lee and Tom Tillis, he will spend an indeterminate amount of time in quarantine, and under the Senate rules, that's a problem for Republicans. The Constitution dictates that a majority of each chamber of Congress shall constitute a quorum to do business. Under Senate rules, that means 51 senators must be present, not the vice president. Senators must be present to conduct business on the floor. Mike Pence, as vice president, does not count with respect to a quorum, unless whatever. The Senate has 53 Republican members. Only 50 are available to be physically present at the moment, unless, of course, they say F quarantine, at which point crumple up what we have here and throw it away. Unlike the House, which established rules for proxy voting, the Senate has no such protocol and requires physical presence for any floor votes up to and including a quorum call. Those of you who watch C-SPAN know that from time to time a senator will conclude his or her speech by saying, I note the absence of a quorum, or they say sometimes, I suggest the absence of a quorum, leading to Senate staff beginning a roll call. This is a typical tactic to freeze the Senate in place as it waits for another senator to get to the floor. Senators do not rush to the floor when a quorum call is initiated because norms dictate that the next senator speaking can waive the quorum call without objection. What if these norms flew out the window, however? What if, in the midst of an aggressive power grab to obtain a Supreme Court seat weeks before a national election, the Democratic minority saw 3 quarantined senators as an opportunity to shut down the Senate for the immediate future? The scenario would work like this. Under Senate rules, a quorum is presumed to be present. A Democrat would have to get to the floor, which they can do simply, or would have to get the floor, that is, be granted speaking privileges, which they can do simply by objecting to whatever unanimous consent the Republicans want to move forward on a matter, or, if no one's speaking, simply standing up and having the Senate President pro tem recognize them to speak. There's a lot of ways, of course, to be recognized. That Democrat would simply note the absence of a quorum and then leave the chamber and actually hide. And you'll see why later. If we don't get to it later, of course, it's because he doesn't want to be turned up for being dragged in by the sergeant-at-arms for a live quorum call later on if the Republicans are trying to insist on a quorum for the continuation of business, which they're not. So, that kind of throws a wrench into things. The questions that we discussed on Twitter prior to his writing this, people were asking, well, if a Democrat notes the absence of a quorum and then the Republicans bring their 50, let's say they're able to get their 50, isn't the Democrat who noted the absence of a quorum number 51, and therefore it's over and they have a quorum and everything continues? And the answer to that quickly is no, unless the Democrat stays there and answers the roll call. The way you establish a quorum is call the roll. And if you're standing there, I don't know what the rule is. I don't know whether you can actually do this. If you're standing there in the chamber and everybody can see you and they call your name, but you refuse to answer the roll call, I'm not certain you're counted at that moment as part of a quorum. If they go to a live quorum call to produce, to compel your attendance, that's another thing. But, and they can make a fuss over the fact that you're obviously there and refusing to do your job as a senator without having been granted a leave of absence by the Senate. But all it takes is leave the floor. The fact that they saw you 5 minutes ago doesn't mean you've answered the roll call, and they don't know what happened to you since. So you leave. At that point, back to David here, Republicans would be stuck. Even if they could assemble all of their available members, it would only add up to 50, not enough for a quorum, unless they just break quarantine. If Democrats boycott the quorum call, Republicans cannot do anything on the floor for the time being. They probably could still hold committee hearings, such as the Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett, which they can also, by the way, apparently hold even while the Senate is in adjournment, which is, I think, what they would like to do in pushing this adjournment. But if 2 members of the Judiciary Committee are sick and can't show up, that's another thing. Anyway, but they would be stymied, Republicans would be, from doing anything on the floor, as long as they're down 3 members. There are provisions in the Constitution for the majority leader to instruct the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms to arrest absentee senators and physically drag them to the Capitol. This actually happened in 1988, not like ancient history, when Republicans were trying to block a vote on campaign finance reform. The Sergeant-at-Arms led a posse of 6 Capitol police officers in the middle of the night. They found Senator Bob Packwood in his office, which was probably the least of his problems eventually, and forced open a door that he had wedged with a heavy chair alongside to block entry. He was carried feet first onto the Senate floor. For reals. Then he had other problems. Obviously, preparations would have to be made to scatter all Democratic senators, including the one who makes the quorum call, to the 4 winds. I imagine him, he says, running into a waiting car outside the Capitol and hightailing it out of town. Of course, if just one more Republican contracted COVID-19, the Democrat who initiates the quorum call could stay in the chamber and the Republicans would still be out of luck. Democrats have already considered making quorum calls as part of the array of options to make it harder on Republicans to conduct business. Slowing down the Senate would delay the Barrett confirmation until after the election. Republicans would be able to deal with Barrett in the lame duck session, but a resounding Democratic victory in November and possibly the seating of Mark Kelly in Arizona, and I guess also possibly is it Warnock in Georgia? We mentioned him before, and I don't think that there's any reason why he couldn't also be seated early, but it would require cooperation to some extent by the governor. But he should be seated earlier. I don't think the governor can delay all the way to January 3rd on this, given the nature of the election. But we can explore that later. Anyway, so even the possibility of seating Mark Kelly immediately, because it being a special election, puts pressure on Republicans and lowers the margin for error. Now, I guess just before we exit for the day, Lee and Tillis both sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which might have its own quorum problems, as George Washington University professor and congressional rules expert Sarah Binder explains. Committee rules require physical presence of a quorum to report the Barrett nomination to the full Senate. If Democrats boycott that proceeding, Republicans would only have 10 of the 22 members available, though this doesn't necessarily stop Mitch McConnell from bringing up the Barrett nomination without a committee vote. So don't forget that. You can bypass and discharge the committee. Of course, Johnson, Lee, and Tillis will not be in quarantine forever. They could be back in action in time for a Senate vote on Barrett, but Democrats pulling the quorum call gambit this week, when some lower court judicial confirmations have been set up, would signal that they mean business about using the rules to their fullest capacity. Given that Senate Republicans congregate at indoor caucus lunches every week, where they meet without masks, many more Republican positive tests, perhaps on a staggered timeline, are possible, if not necessarily likely. Plus, by forcing quorum calls, Democrats would keep every single Republican in Washington rather than on the campaign trail, and that's an important thing too, right? Numerous Republican senators are in tight races at home and don't want to be stuck running back and forth to the Capitol. That's absolutely the case. Finally, each passing day makes it tougher for Republicans to complete the Barrett nomination, and it offers a slight possibility each day that passes that a member cracks and pushes out the fight until after the election. That's also a possibility. right? You can imagine this weighing on a Mitt Romney or Lamar Alexander, both of whom have vowed to vote for any nominee presented before them, but perhaps not under such circumstances. At this point, Democrats have a new tool at their disposal to make life tough on the Senate majority. They should use it because the stakes are too high to acquiesce. That said, you can always count on Republicans to respond to aggression with aggression, finding a way to get the quorum to conduct business. As David Siegel of Demand Progress told me, that would be David Day and not me, about the COVID-stricken Republican senators, I wouldn't put it past them using hazmat suits. Hey, I wouldn't put it past them using nothing at all and making Democrats who are queasy about being in the same room be the ones who leave. And if they leave after they've cast their votes or answered a quorum call or what have you, then it makes no difference. So COVID by itself isn't going to answer the question unless it really knocks them for a loop. But, hey, that can happen, and more of them can become ill. And now the next question, whether or not the committee is able to change rules and allow people to attend remotely. So far, they don't have the rules for that. Don't know if they can actually get the rules in place to do that. But we have more to explore for the rest of the week, and we'll more chances to do it.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning
with David Waldman.
All right, is there anything we skipped today? Well, of course, there's hundreds of stories we skipped today. That's why we have Justice Putnam coming up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And let's see, I can already see there's a couple of things, including some news about Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton happening that he'll be covering that we did not. Stay tuned.